Ave Maria, welcome back to No Apologies. I'm Brother Joseph, and today we want to begin looking at the Spanish Inquisition, a topic which is often pointed to by others as proof that the Catholic Church cannot be the church which was founded by Christ, because they say the true Church of Christ could never sanction something as cruel or unjust. We say, first of all, that claim is illogical in itself, because even if there were cruelties and injustice, it proves nothing about the foundation of the Catholic Church itself, but only speaks of particular individuals within the Church who didn't live up to her ideals. So no amount of human error or scandalous behavior can undo her divine foundation. This is true whether we're speaking about the Inquisition or anything at all. But having said that, we also say that claim is false because it's founded on a false conception of the Inquisition. A false conception which comes from pulling it out of its historical context and by attributing to it grossly exaggerated numbers and ideas. Today we're going to look at the historical context. So the purpose of the Inquisition was to ensure and protect the common good of the people and of the state by uprooting or preventing the spread of heresy, which would be false teaching, or in a general sense, false religion. A heresy which would threaten the common good by the loss of spiritual life and would destroy the public peace by conflicts and loss of physical life. And this was, without exception, the accepted mindset of all of Europe at the time, and also the accepted mindset of all religions at the time. Both Luther and Calvin sanctioned the right of the state to uproot heresy, and many Protestant reformers were very involved in their own inquisitions in England and in Ireland. So it was understood the danger of those who would undermine the very spirit or foundation on which a particular society was built. So if an American is pitting himself against and advocating against the spirit of democracy, he's at the same time pitting himself against the American government, because that's what the American government is founded on. So in Spain, we're speaking about a Catholic monarchy that was the legitimate established government of the state. So a threat which undermined the faith on which that very government was founded was also a threat against the government itself, which is why heresy was treated as treason. So to root out heresy was to establish a certain stability. But even more, at that particular time in Spain, to root out heresy was to preserve the very existence of that state. Queen Isabella consented to the Inquisition in the year 1480, just 1 month after a Muslim invasion of the Italian town of Toronto, in which 12,000 Italians were killed and 10,000 were sold into slavery. And this was also just 20 years after the Muslims had taken custody of the greatest Christian city, Constantinople. So it's under the shadow of this very real and active threat that the Inquisition was begun, which sought to identify those same people who were living in southern Spain and who were pretending to be converted to Catholicism in order to subvert the established state. So it would be like today a communist living in America with a mask on in order to secretly infiltrate and destroy the established democracy. That is treason, and it's punishable by death even today in this country, just as it was across the board in the times of Queen Isabella.
And we want to show that much of the scandal and misunderstanding against the Inquisition, and therefore against the Catholic Church, is often rooted in grossly exaggerated ideas and numbers. The trial procedure is often exaggerated and seen as something unfair and tyrannical, where they could interrogate anyone off the street at any time, and without any kind of defense, these persons could be condemned. But we point out, first of all, that the Inquisition only had jurisdiction over professed Catholics. So we're not talking about a religious intolerance. we're talking about a heretical intolerance which is taking place inside the Catholic Church, which is a completely just thing. So there were Jews and Muslims practicing their faiths openly in Spain during the time of the Inquisition, who never once bothered at all by it. We also point out that the historical procedure of the trials was in fact extremely just, and even more so than most other courts in Europe at that time. When there was a complaint or a suspect of heresy in an area, the inquisitor arrived and set up a 30-day grace period, and anyone who came to him within those 30 days and confessed that he'd been teaching heresy was given a suitable penance, such as make a pilgrimage or to make an offering, and then the whole thing was completely finished. If after those 30 days there was someone who was to be brought in for questioning, that accused person was first told to write a list of his enemies, and any testimony that came forward during the trial that came from someone whose name was on that list was immediately thrown out. There had to be at least 2 witnesses before any evidence was accepted, and false accusations were severely punished, even at times with death. The inquisitor had to conduct the trial in cooperation with the council and in cooperation with the local bishop. The accused was given a lawyer for his defense, and he could be examined only in the presence of 2 other disinterested priests whose explicit obligation it was to retain any arbitrary acts. So the historical fact is that the conditions of the ecclesial courts were so much better than the civil, that there are even documented cases of secular prisoners purposely blaspheming so that their cases could be transferred and tried in an ecclesial court. Other exaggerations were recently revealed in a 1994 document put out by the BBC, a non-Catholic corporation, entitled The Myth of the Spanish Inquisition, in which 3 non-Catholic professors were able to study the original documents and records which were kept in Spain. Each of these professors admitted to the complete demolishment of their previous notion of the Inquisition. One of the exaggerations brought out was the punishment and torture that was inflicted through the Inquisition. While there were at times sentences of imprisonment and public humiliation and a surrender to civil authorities, which meant that they could be put to death, the vast majority of punishments was neither inhumane in themselves or in the ways in which they were inflicted, seeking the correction of the delinquent more than just the chastisement due to violation of law. Most frequently, it was good works that were ordered, such as building a church, making a pilgrimage, offering a candle or a chalice, or even lighter, such as just to hear a mass or to observe a fast. The BBC also relates that these punishments, and even the stricter ones, were often mitigated or even remitted altogether based on the petition of a third party or even the petition of the accused person themselves. They would base on old age or poverty or sickness. So in the records were frequently found life imprisonments being reduced to just a fine, and then later that being reduced to just an alms, and participation in a crusade being reduced to a pilgrimage and then to a visit of some neighboring church. A son once obtained his father's release just simply by asking and giving no other further special reasons to base it on. And there are also many examples of prisoners being permitted to leave for extended periods of time, say to recover from a sickness or to care for some ill parents. So the documentary declares that as a whole, the Inquisition was carried out humanely. That's not to say that there weren't at times abuses, times of excessive punishment or overly aggressive actions. But as the documentary points out, that compared to other tribunals and other countries where these things were absolutely commonplace, the Inquisition comes out ahead. We would also point out that yes, it's a historical fact that corrections were made from Rome when complaints reached their ear. These corrections threatened disposition and commanded that the inquisitors would act only in conjunction with the local bishops. But the very fact that these corrections were made is proof that the abusers were acting according to their own minds, not to the mind of the church. And a final exaggeration is the number of people who were actually put to death. The BBC relates that during its 100-year prime of the 16th century, there were only 40 to 50 people who were put to death, and there can be found no other evidence to suggest any number higher than that, especially not the millions which we sometimes hear. So if all of these things that I've just mentioned are true, then how do we account for the horrors and numbers which we often find in the modern mind? The three professors traced the history of the myth to a piece of propaganda written by a man named Montanus, who wrote in the year 1567 a document called A Discovery and Plain Declaration of Sundry and Subtle Practices of the Holy Inquisition of Spain. It was published in 5 different languages and was dispersed throughout all of Europe. So in it, Montanus masquerades as a Protestant victim of the Inquisition, relating all the supposed horrors that it brought. So it's this piece of propaganda that began the myth and gave to the world an image of the Inquisition that has still persisted even to this day. Thanks for joining me here on No Apologies. Ave Maria.